Q Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the National on Friday the 31st of May 2024 from the news section. CalMac contract to run West Coast ferries extended by 12 months. This article is written by Gregor Young. The contract for government-owned ferry operator CalMac to run services on Scotland's west coast has been extended by a year. The move comes as the Scottish Government continues to consider a direct award to CalMac for the next deal on the Clyde and Hebrides Ferry Service CHFS network, which is the current preferred path, rather than accepting bids from rival firms. The contract was due to expire on September the 30th, but the extra year will allow further work on the potential direct award to be undertaken. Transport Secretary Fiona Hislop said, "While good progress has been made on the due diligence related to a proposed direct award to CalMac, it will not be possible to conclude all of the processes by September the 30th, which is the end date of the current contract. We have made arrangements to extend the existing contract for 12 months. This will allow the due diligence process to robustly conclude and, subject to the outcome of that process, a final decision to be made on a direct contract award. I will provide a further update to Parliament later this year on progress and on timings for decision-making within the extended period." Duncan Mackesson, the interim chief executive of CalMac, welcomed the news. He said, "CalMac is full of dedicated people who are passionate about delivering a reliable service for island communities. With 6 new major vessels due to join the fleet by 2026 and significant infrastructure upgrades at numerous ports and harbours underway or planned, we are confident that Lifeline ferry services will continue to improve. During the extension period, we will be working hard to provide certainty and reliability and listening closely to the views of local people who rely on our services most." That article was written by Gregor Young. This is from the National on Friday the 31st of May 2024 from the news section. Horizon. MSPs pass law to exonerate wrongly convicted sub-postmasters. This article is written by Steph Braun. Holyrood has passed unprecedented legislation to exonerate sub-postmasters in Scotland who were wrongly convicted as part of the Post Office Horizon scandal. Those whose convictions are quashed under the Post Office Horizon System Offences Scotland Bill will be able to access the UK Government Financial Redress Scheme. After the Scottish Parliament agreed to use its emergency procedure, the bill has been introduced and passed unopposed in just over 2 weeks to allow justice and redress to be delivered to victims as swiftly as possible, in line with the UK bill, which did not cover sub-postmasters in Scotland. Sub-postmasters who previously sought to appeal their convictions will also be exonerated, following a Scottish Government amendment to the bill. Those convicted of relevant offences will have them automatically quashed on the day after the legislation is granted royal assent, and those exonerated will then be able to access the UK Government Financial Redress Scheme. Justice Secretary Angela Constance said, "I hope this bill goes some way to bring justice to innocent sub-postmasters who had their lives ruined by being wrongly convicted of offences of dishonesty on the basis of tainted evidence from the faulty Post Office Horizon system." As the UK Government's legislation was not extended to cover Scotland, we have worked as quickly as possible to ensure parity for affected sub-postmasters here, who will also be able to access the UK Government's compensation scheme. The unprecedented step of introducing legislation to right this terrible wrong was necessary to respond to the scale of the scandal and the length of time that victims have waited for justice. We will now be seeking royal assent for the bill as quickly as possible, so affected sub-postmasters can have their convictions quashed and then access the compensation they deserve. Constance said for an offence to be considered relevant, the time it took place and the type of crime would be considered. The person convicted would need to have been working in a post office at the time, and the conviction would need to be connected to the post office business. In addition, the Horizon system would have to have been in use by the post office where they were working at the time. The UK Parliament has already passed similar legislation to clear the convictions of sub-postmasters involved in the Horizon scandal, which has been described as the greatest miscarriage of justice in the legal system. That article was written by Steph Braun. This is from The National on Friday the 31st of May 2024, from the news section. Jobs lost as Scottish firm in administration after 41 years. This article is written by Rebecca Newlands. Jobs have been lost as a Glasgow firm has gone into administration after more than 40 years. Administrators have been appointed to Rich's HGV Training Centre Limited as of May 28, 2024. Founded in 1983, the company specialises in training HGV drivers for the haulage industry and construction plant and forklift operators. Their centre is based in the city's Springburn, and they serve private clients, district councils and utility companies. Michelle Elliott and Callum Carmichael of specialist business advisory firm FRP are acting as joint administrators. A total of 36 people have been made redundant, while administrators explore the potential sale of the business and assets, including vehicles, plant machinery and the site itself. Joint administrator and partner at FRP, Michelle Elliott, said, "Rich's HGV Training Centre Limited was founded more than 40 years ago after the owner decided to use his own driving experience to train others. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing downturn of the construction sector and struggling to recover post-pandemic, the company was no longer able to meet its financial obligations. After the directors exhausted all other options, they took the difficult decision to put the company into administration. We're now focused on helping impacted staff access support from the Redundancy Payment Service and are working with support agency such as PACE while we market the assets of the business for sale." That article was written by Rebecca Newlands. This is from The National on Friday the 31st of May 2024, from the news section. Scottish Greens. John Swinney must halt grants for Israel-linked firms. This article is written by Hamish Morrison. John Swinney has been urged to immediately halt government grants from going to companies complicit in West Bank settlements. Scottish Greens co-leader Patrick Harvey said it was shocking and inexplicable public money was supporting arms companies the UN had deemed were complicit in Israeli settlements in Palestine. He demanded the Scottish Government consider its devolved responsibilities in relation to Israel's genocidal action against Palestine. Speaking at First Minister's Questions on Thursday, Swinney said he would need a firm legal basis to halt Scottish enterprise grants from going to companies the UN had said were complicit in Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank. It comes after it was revealed earlier this month that Raytheon, BAE Systems and Leonardo had all received grants from Scottish enterprise, despite concerns about their links with Israel. All three companies make components, planes or bombs for the Israeli Defence Forces. Harvey said that despite past assurances from former First Minister Humza Yousaf that no companies profiting from Israel's bombardment of Gaza should receive public money, the Scottish Government has not yet taken this action to ban companies on the UN's list of complicit companies from receiving grants. He called for grants to be halted immediately. Swinney replied, "I will look carefully at the points that Mr Harvey has raised about any support for companies that are involved in this activity. Our enterprise agencies have appropriate safeguards in place to ensure that any funding provided is used only for the specific purpose for which it is intended." I suspect in Mr Harvey's question he wants me to extend that beyond that protection, and on that matter I would have to take great care to ensure we had a legal justification before so doing. But Harvey said the First Minister was not yet providing clarity on what the Scottish Government should do within its powers. He added, "The First Minister is right that they do not support the production of munitions with those grants, but that simply isn't enough. If you contribute to building a bigger bomb factory, you don't get to say that you haven't funded the production of the bombs." And even since October the 7th, Raytheon, BAE Systems and Leonardo have all received eye-watering sums from the Scottish Government's agency Scottish Enterprise. Swinney replied, "I don't think the analogy that he strikes about the construction of a weapons factory is a particularly fair analogy of the support that we put in place, but I will go away and look at that carefully. The point I was essentially raising in my earlier answer is that there will be a legal basis for us applying safeguards in relation to the issuing of grants, but we have to have a legal basis for saying why, on other issues not related to the Israel-Gaza conflict, that we would have a basis for not providing a grant. And that's not me being pedantic, that's just simply the legal basis on which the government got to act, and we have to always act within the law. I have to take the views of the law officers deadly seriously in the actions that we take. Scottish Enterprise has previously said it does not provide support for the development of munitions or weaponry. It said money given to the firms in question was unrelated to the deeply distressing situation in the Middle East. It has also said its due diligence human checks are robust. Leonardo, BAE Systems and Raytheon were approached for comment. That article was written by Hamish Morrison. This is from The National on Friday the 31st of May 2024 from the Culture section. Scottish Island Hotel named as the country's top romantic spa break. This article is written by Adam Robertson. The most romantic spa break in Scotland has been named in a new list, with the hotel the only place in the country to feature on the UK-wide list. The Daily Telegraph has published a list of Britain's most romantic spa breaks, and the Isle of Eriska Hotel is the only Scottish destination to feature. Ratings were issued by a team of expert reviewers who spent at least one night at every hotel, tried at least one meal and trialled any other experiences which might have been on offer. Situated on the island of Eriska, at the entrance to Loch Crairon on Scotland's west coast, and features 34 bedrooms and suites in total, as well as 2 restaurants and luxury spa. It also features a heated swimming pool, a fully equipped gym, a sauna and a steam room. Overall, the Telegraph gave the hotel a rating of 8 out of 10 and gave particular praise for its Ishka and spa treatments, as well as its sophisticated dining options. The newspaper said, "Treat your loved one to a night or two in one of the Scottish baronial mansion's luxurious spa suites. Set on a private island, accessible by a bridge, amid glorious scenery in the West Highlands, these rooms have their own hot tubs and private gardens. They really push the experience up there as one of Scotland's top luxury spa breaks for couples." That article was written by Adam Robertson. This is from The National on Friday the 31st of May 2024, from the comments section. The difference between the SNP and other parties must be exploited. This article is written by Professor Richard Murphy. Are you bored yet? As questions about this election go, that seems to be the most obvious to ask. That's because the Tories seem intent on turning this election into a fiasco. In contrast, Labour's great achievement is to say nothing, most especially when it comes to abuse of Diane Abbott, one of its longest-serving MPs. Meanwhile, the Lib Dem leader has fallen in a lake. And whenever these parties mention Scotland, it is invariably in the context of how the people of Scotland should do their duty to Westminster-focused parties. I suspect I overstate my case, but not by much. So far this election is boring, and that's also, by and large, true of the genuinely Scottish campaigns. Everything I see, read and hear so far says that nothing anyone has yet had to say about any aspect of the campaign, in or out of Scotland, is of any great significance. Mostly we have learned about Tory incompetence, Lib Dem attention-seeking, Labour aggression, most especially towards those who have recently been in that party, whilst the SNP wants, as Keir Starmer once did, to simply be taken seriously again, whilst pretending that the past does not matter. It is therefore to be hoped that this election might still come alive. It would be even better if something really relevant to Scotland comes out of it, apart from arguments on election debates. But what if it does not? Suppose that from now until July the 4th, we must suffer miserable campaigns from the unionist parties, all of whom are promoting the same basic idea. That idea is that politics cannot provide an answer to any known question, because consumer choice is the only thing they think that matters in life. And what each of these parties now believes is that whatever it is that the government offers, it does not involve consumer choice. As a result, every one of these politicians believes that their job is to offer less government. That is precisely why their offerings are, without exception, so uninspiring. In contrast, for all their own neoliberal failings, the SNP do reflect the belief in community that still exists in Scotland, but which is increasingly noticeable by its absence in England in particular. The result is that the SNP have a story to sell, even if the unionist independence line is ignored. The commitment to the community that they have gives them the chance to talk about how they have promoted social goals, in a way that sets them apart from the English-orientated parties that are their main competitors. I suggest that it is this difference that can stop this election being boring. The varying attitudes towards child poverty exemplify this difference and how it can be exploited. The Tories introduced the two-child benefit cap in England that has pushed 1 million children and their families into poverty. Labour are saying they cannot find the £1.8 billion required to relieve this poverty, although some very simple changes to the taxation of wealth would let them do so with ease. The Lib Dems say they will get rid of the cap, but so what? They have no chance of actually putting into effect any policy that they propose at this election, so small is the chance of a hung parliament. And then there are the SNP, who pioneered the baby box idea, and have also, since COVID, made additional payments to families in Scotland to support the most vulnerable children. Their policy on child poverty is distinct, decidedly different, and even daring when the resources made available to them by Westminster are constrained. They have proved that they can actually deliver a policy to tackle child poverty when others are not even showing an inclination to try. The difference in approach is significant and important. I should add it is almost unknown about outside Scotland, which is a fact that the other parties might be relying on. There is, however, no reason for people in Scotland to not know about it. That gives the SNP the chance to exploit their success with this policy as evidence that the division between them and the Unionist parties is much more significant than the simple issue of independence would suggest. The evidence that this policy approach provides is that the SNP still believe in the power of government to deliver benefit for the people of the country. Simultaneously, it is apparent that the English parties contesting this election do not believe this. They, instead, seem to believe that government is a burden to be suffered mainly by the well-off. If the SNP do not exploit this fundamental difference in approach towards the whole issue of governing and on the role of the government, then it is making a serious tactical mistake in this election campaign. They have to make clear that if the people of Scotland want to vote for a party that actually believe they can make a change, they have only one option available to them, and there is nothing boring about that. That article was written by Professor Richard Murphy.
This is from The National on Monday, 27th May 2024, from the news section. 75-year-old in court on murder charge after death near Aberfeldy. By Gregor Young. A 75-year-old has appeared in court charged with the murder of a man who was found dead on a track near Aberfeldy in February. David Campbell appeared at Dundee Sheriff Court on Monday, charged with the murder of Brian Lowe, 65. Lowe's body was found on a track near Piltelly, near Aberfeldy, Perth and Kinross, on February 17th. It was not realised until a post-mortem examination 6 days later, however, that he had been shot. The BBC reported that Lowe's death certificate states that he had suffered a shotgun wound to the neck and chest. Lowe had retired from his job as a groundsman at the Edradinite estate in 2023. Campbell, of Perth and Kinross, was charged with murder and with attempting to defeat the ends of justice. He made no plea in court and was committed for further examination. He remains in custody. He is due to appear in court again within the next 8 days. That article was by Gregor Young. This is from The National on Monday, 27th May 2024, from the news section. Argyll and Bute, entire Scottish island for sale with stunning views. By Alistair Ferguson. An entire Scottish island which has 7 cottages, a lighthouse, stunning views, and used to belong to a legendary rock star has gone up for sale. Sanda Island, located just off the southern coast of the Mull of Kintyre and is in Argyll and Bute, has gone up for sale for a staggering £2.5 million. The stunning island, which is around 453 acres in total, boasts incredible views from its multiple hills, the highest being 23 metres above sea level. Sanda is accessible via boat as it has two slipways, one north and one south on the island, that run out from its beautiful sandy beaches. Along with the breathtaking views, there are 7 cottages on the island, 4 of which are based at the island's northern end, while 3 are next to the lighthouse in the south. Most of the houses have been renovated by the current owners, which includes the installation of double glazing, shower rooms and underfloor electric heating. There are also 2 smaller islands north of Sanda, Sheep and Gullymore, which are also included in the sale. Sheep Island is the larger of the 2 at 31 acres, while Glunnymore Island is just 4 acres, but both offer their own charming scenery and views. The island was previously owned in the 60s by the famous Scottish musician Jack Bruce, who was the lead vocalist and bassist of the iconic rock band Cream. It is now home to some equally incredible wildlife, such as puffins, storm petrels, razorbills, manx shearwaters, kittiwakes, guillemots, great black-backed gulls, shags and black guillemot. It even has a small functioning farm, which is home to 55 black-faced sheep and has a registered farm code which even receives a subsidy. The 7 homes, lighthouse and farm are all connected by tracks which can be accessed easily by quad bikes, and there is even a helipad to help gain access to the island. The beautiful island overlooks the channel between mainland Scotland and Northern Ireland and is mainly accessed from Campbelltown. The lucky next owner will have incredible views of the Antrim Hills and the beautiful beaches on Carskey. They will even have a unique view of the Isle of Arran. That article was by Alistair Ferguson. This is from The National on Monday, 27th May 2024, from the Politics section. Gender balance of Scotland's general election candidates revealed by Lucy Jackson. Not one of Scotland's political parties has produced a gender-balanced selection of candidates for the general election, it has been revealed. At the time of print, the number of overall candidates which have so far been announced is 218. Of those, only 71 are women, just 33%. The party with the most gender-balanced selection of candidates is Scottish Labour, where 41% of candidates are women. The party has selected a candidate for all 57 seats, 23 of which are women. The Scottish Greens follow next, with 40%, or 10, of their candidates being women. The party has so far selected 25 candidates. The SNP have selected all of their candidates with a total of 22, or 39%, being women. The Scottish Conservatives have not yet confirmed candidates for 13 seats. A total of 23%, or 10, of their candidates so far are women. The party with the least gender-balanced selection of candidates is ALBA. The party has selected 12 candidates so far, with just one of them, former SNP MP Corey Wilson, being a woman. Not all candidates have been confirmed yet. The list will be updated when the final number of candidates has been confirmed. That article was by Lucy Jackson. This is from The National on Monday, 27th May 2024, from the Politics section. The people of Glasgow react to Tory plans for national service. By Xander Elliards. I spent 22 years in the army. It ain't gonna work. I don't want to die for Rishi Sunak. To be honest, I don't think any 18-year-old in this country wants to do that. They must be desperate if they're going to start sending children to war. These were just some of the less expletive-laden responses the National was given when it asked the people of Glasgow for their views on the Conservative plans to bringing in conscription if they win the general election. That is obviously a pretty massive if, given that Rishi Sunak's party are trailing Labour in the polls by more than 20 points. But the Tories' announcement has started a conversation, and the idea wasn't unanimously derided. Some people on the streets of Glasgow, almost exclusively older ones, thought that the idea had some merit. There was a general feeling that young people need more options and more structure, and national service may give them that. However, even where the proposals found support, they were seen as wrong-headed. One person said they would support a more civic-minded form of national service, with a focus on infrastructure rather than replacing trained armed forces personnel with freshly graduated school children. Among younger people, however, the consensus was unanimous. The idea was seen as a desperate attempt from the Conservatives to play to their voter base at young people's expense. They sort of think that the under-25s are all these woke, non-binary wimps, and yet they want an army of them. It doesn't make sense to me, one person quipped. Others suggested the idea had not been thought through, questioning how it could be both mandatory and not legally enforced, or why some people would want to get involved in service for a state which is increasingly stripping back what it offers in return. Time will tell whether the Tories have any more bright ideas up their sleeves before the general election rolls around. That article was by Xander Elliards.
From the National, Tuesday the 28th of May, from the politics section, exclusive Green candidate aims to improve disability representation at Westminster. Article by Lucy Jackson. A rising star councillor running the general election has said Westminster does not care about disabled people as she looks to improve representation in Parliament. The Scottish Greens launched a campaign in Edinburgh North and Leith on Tuesday, as local candidate Kelly O'Neill was joined by Lorna Slater, the party's co-leader and MSP for Lothian. O'Neill is currently a Scottish Greens councillor for the 4th Ward of the Edinburgh City Council. Her campaign is focused on action on climate change, advocating for peace and an end to complicity with genocide in Palestine, a fairer social security system, and breaking down barriers disabled people face from the UK government. Campaigners at the event told The National that the party has seen a surge in support since the end of the Bute House Agreement in April, adding that there hadn't been such a large increase in memberships since the 2014 independence referendum. Slater said the general election campaign had so far been really exciting, adding that the public has resonated with the Greens' vision for a strong, independent Scotland inside the EU where we belong. People seem really excited to hear what we have to say, she told The National. We can do more for people, more for climate change, with all the powers that an independent country has. We can build a brilliant future, we just have to decide that it's going to be that way. O'Neill, labelled a rising star in the Scottish Greens by Slater, is excited to be speaking up about what the Scottish Greens are doing as the party looks to set to stand more candidates than ever before. We completely understand that in Westminster the vote is not built for Scotland's parties, she said. We're here today to remind people that the Scottish Greens are not a wasted vote. It's going to be a very busy month, but I'm looking forward to it. O'Neill has previously spoken out on Twitter/X about the lack of accessibility in her current workplace, Edinburgh City Council, where she was elected in 2022. As a wheelchair user, O'Neill has been unable to access the main city chambers and instead has no choice but to work in a separate building away from the other councillors. City chambers was not a good accessible place, but we've worked around that, O'Neill said. For me, personally, it is so brilliant and empowering to start a campaign as a disabled candidate and have the people of Edinburgh have the opportunity to vote for someone like me and for a party like us. If she were elected to Westminster, O'Neill said, they would have a lot of issues with me being there. She continued, and that's a great thing. I think it's about time that someone has gone there and raised those things. O'Neill reflected on the moment Conservative MP Craig McAnally received a standing ovation upon returning to work in Parliament after losing his limbs to sepsis. He was welcomed back with open arms, which was beautiful to see no matter what party, O'Neill said. But it was really disheartening because I know in my heart of hearts that the building does not care about him, it does not care about people like us. It completely governs in a way that waits towards killing us more than actually protecting us. She added, it's a protest in itself, I think, just standing in this election and giving people the opportunity to vote for people like me. Disabled people are about 20% of Scotland's population, and it's less than 1% of MPs. It's wonderful seeing people like you represented in places of power, making decisions. If a younger person in a wheelchair sees another person in a wheelchair running for election, maybe if they don't agree with my policies, but it's about that representation. City of Edinburgh Council has been contacted for comment. And that article was by Lucy Jackson. From the National, Tuesday the 28th of May, from the news section, exclusive, John Swinney, Israeli PM's response to Rafah attack unconscionable. Report by Lucy Jackson. John Swinney has called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's response to the attack in Rafah, which resulted in Palestinians being burned alive, unconscionable. The comments came as the First Minister attended the Scottish Poetry Library's new exhibition, Moon Tell Me Truth, on Tuesday, which features a collection of poetry written by children in Gaza. At least 35 displaced people living in tents were killed by an Israeli airstrike in Rafah, most of the victims being women and children. Hussam Zomwat, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, labelled the attack a massacre. Netanyahu called it a terrible mistake. Asked about the Israeli leader's comments, Swinney said, it's hard to reconcile those comments with the reality of what's happened. An attack on a refugee camp is just unconscionable, so I don't accept that explanation. I think this is another harming crisis that's taking place in the crisis in Gaza. We have to take steps to bring that crisis to an end. The First Minister has put pressure on Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer to immediately recognise the statehood of Palestine, adding that the SNP would force a binding vote at Westminster after the general election if they failed to do so. Swinney's comments came as SNP MSP John Mason claimed the International Criminal Court, ICC, is biased against Israel. The ICC chief prosecutor last week announced he would seek the arrest of senior leaders of Hamas, as well as Netanyahu and one of his senior ministers, for alleged war crimes. The First Minister told the National it was important that everyone exercises care over what is said about this particular issue. He continued, the ICC has gone through a dispassionate process and we should respect the process that they've undertaken. And that article was an exclusive by Lucy Jackson. From the National, Tuesday the 28th of May, from the politics section, Scottish Greens candidate faces deselection over J.K. Rowling spat. Article by Hamish Morrison. A Scottish Greens candidate is facing deselection after calling J.K. Rowling a torn-faced cow. The party will consider whether to keep on Sophie Molly as its candidate in Gordon and Buchan after allegedly bringing the party into disrepute through social media posts. The Herald reports that she has received a letter from Caroline Scrimgeour, the co-chair of the party's ruling executive, informing her that members in Aberdeenshire have asked if she could be deselected as a candidate. They had attached screenshots of relevant social media posts, which may include her attack on the Harry Potter author. Molly was given a deadline of midday on Wednesday to submit her defence, and her fate will be considered at a meeting of the party's executive later this week. Scrimgeour said, "If the outcome is to be recommend your deselection, you will no longer be a candidate for the Scottish Greens. If the Scottish Green Party executive does not vote to deselect, your candidacy will continue. In either event, we do our best to provide any support you need. I am sorry for the distress this email and the circumstances are no doubt causing. If you need any further information, would like to contribute to the Scottish Green Party executive in writing, or would like to support from the party during this process, please let us know by reply." The Herald reported that Molly had claimed taking screenshots of her tweets was a breach of privacy and that she would not comment further. Earlier this month, the candidate criticised a book called The Woman Who Wouldn't Wished, which includes essays from a number of gender-critical women, including the Harry Potter author. Molly said the book was deeply transphobic, adding, "It puts the safety of all trans people at risk. Promoting hate does nothing but harm society. Trans people are not removing anyone's rights. The gender critical have removed trans people's right to feel safe in public spaces." Rowling responded, "I'm seriously impressed that you've been able to read and review an unpublished book of which there are currently only 2 copies in existence, neither of which have been lent to you." The writer then highlighted previous comments by Molly under a different Twitter/X handle. These included, "J.K. Rowling is a man LARPing as a woman. Pass it on. Let's shame the torn-faced cow." LARPing is an abbreviation of live-action role-playing. In response to another post by the Green candidate, Rowling wrote, "I'm just interested in the language you use about women you don't like, Sophie. Torn-faced, B*THC, etc." Molly later told another user of Twitter/X, "I stand by those comments." A Scottish Greens spokesperson said, "We can confirm that our executive committee is scheduled to meet as normal on Wednesday. It would be inappropriate to comment on any individual cases that may be considered. Our code of conduct applies to all party members." Sharing the Herald article on her Twitter/X profile, Molly said, "Seeing as it's in the public domain now because I was illegally doxxed by transphobes. Please email Scottish Greens and tell them I must not be deselected. Trans people deserve representation and will not be bullied out of the public eye by transphobes." She told The National, "I'm the victim of an organised transphobic hate campaign by the gender critical. Their aim is to destroy me." And that article was written by Hamish Morrison. From The National, Tuesday the 28th of May, from the news section. Scottish NHS Board to pay £70,000 after failures cause patient's death. Report by Murray Grayston. Bosses at a Scottish NHS board have been ordered to pay out more than £70,000 for health and safety failings that led to a patient's death. The Ayrshire and Arran Health Board was hit with a £66,000 fine after it admitted failing to ensure that meals provided to Iris McNaught minimised the risk of her choking. McNaught died as a result of the failures. The Health Board was also ordered to make a victim surcharge payment of £4,950 during a hearing at Kilmarnock Sheriff Court on May 28th. Before passing sentence, and with 3 members of the McNaught's family watching from the public gallery, Sheriff Nicola Patrick said the sentence was in no way reflective of the tragedy. Sheriff Patrick said, "Nothing I can see in this case, nor any sentence the court can pass, can reflect the consequences of the failure in this case. I wish to state that the sentence I am passing in this case is in no way reflective of the tragic outcome or the loss sustained by the family and loved ones impacted by this, and I once again extend sincere condolences to those affected." Sheriff Patrick added, "I have listened very carefully to all of the circumstances in this anxious and difficult case. I have also had the benefit of detailed submissions from counsel on behalf of the NHS. I have considered carefully the sentencing guidelines for such cases referred to by counsel and the recent cases I was directed to involving public bodies. All of this is helpful in setting out the factors that must be taken into account. This case turns on what was ultimately a failure to implement a final check, albeit there was a developed system in place to mitigate the risks for those at risk of choking. The NHS in Scotland categorises risk of harm in 3 levels, level 1 being major or extreme, 2 being minor to moderate, and 3 being none. Sheriff Patrick said, "I accept the submission that the failure in this case is a narrow one, and accordingly falls within the low culpability bracket. The absence of any final check, in my view, does mean that the likelihood of harm was medium. That is effectively borne out by what happened. In considering the final harm category that is applicable, there is also no doubt that the offence was a significant cause of actual harm. It was the only cause. This could, on one view, justify moving up a category, but taking everything in the round, I take the view that the offence can be categorised as harm category 2, but substantially moving up the category range is justified." Sheriff Patrick also said that her starting point for a fine, the only available sentence in a corporate prosecution in Scotland's criminal courts, was a penalty of £200,000, but that a number of mitigating factors led to her decision to impose a fine of just 1/3 of that sum. But she also mentioned that the Health Board had previously admitted other breaches of the law. She said, "Of particular relevance are the very significant steps taken to remedy the system failure that gave rise to the incident. The previous convictions are an aggravating factor. However, in addition, I am duty bound to consider the organisation's role in providing a public service and the impact of a fine. Taking all of these matters into account, and having regard to the approach taken by Lord Beckett and HMA via the Chief Constable, I am reducing that figure to £100,000. The organisation has accepted full responsibility for this and has pleaded guilty by way of Section 76 procedure, avoiding the need for a complex and lengthy trial. Applying the appropriate sentencing discount to take account of the plea, the fine will therefore be at one of £66,000 plus the applicable victim surcharge." Dr Crawford McGuffey, Medical Director at NHS Ayrshire and Arran, said, "On behalf of NHS Ayrshire and Arran, I offer my deepest condolences to the family of Mrs Iris McNaught. Our thoughts and sympathies are with her family, friends and all those affected. We fully accept the decision of the court. As a learning organisation, we have shared the findings with staff so that we can ensure the necessary improvements are made to deliver the best possible care across health and social care services on an ongoing basis. NHS Ayrshire and Arran is committed to providing high standards to ensure our patients receive safe and dignified care at all times." And the article was written by Murray Grayston and read by me, Ian McKenna.
The National, recorded on Wednesday, 29th of May 2024, the Culture section. Craigievar, Pink Scottish Castle that inspired Walt Disney to reopen, by Adam Robertson, multimedia journalist. A fairy tale castle, said to have inspired Walt Disney's Cinderella Castle, is to reopen to the public after undergoing a major 18-month renovation project which saw it swathed in pink mesh. Craigievar Castle in Aberdeenshire closed in early 2023 in order to future-proof it against rain and climate change damage as part of its Pink Again restoration campaign. The bright pink castle was covered in mesh 7 stories high to mimic the pink harling which was being replaced. The restoration is now complete and the renovated castle will reopen on Friday. Dating to 1626, the castle is known for its pink exterior, 17th century plaster ceilings and artwork. Staff and volunteers are reinstalling the art collections ahead of the reopening. The National Trust for Scotland warned that extreme weather conditions over the past decade had caused the building to deteriorate, but the restoration had given it a new lease of life. Workers made small changes to the building's detailing and slate roofs that mean it can better cast off rain and snow. After repairs to the walls, stonemason specialists at Harper and Allen applied more than 13,000 litres of special recipe lime wash to the building before removing the last of the scaffolding. The Pink Again project was funded by Historic Environment Scotland. James Henderson, the National Trust for Scotland's operations manager for Craigievar, said, "The fairy tale castle is a global icon of Scottish heritage and a pink beacon for visitors. Our charity can't wait to continue telling the story of Craigievar, and we're extremely proud that the National Trust for Scotland's supporters and the project team have ensured that there are many more chapters to come." Animator Walt Disney is believed to have been inspired by Craigievar Castle's pink exterior when he designed the company's famous Cinderella Castle, which also drew inspiration from other landmarks including Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria. By Adam Robertson. The National, recorded on Wednesday 29th of May 2024. The Culture section. What is a tourist tax and how would this work in Scotland? By Andrew Smart, Trending News Reporter. MSPs in Holyrood are discussing the implementation of a tourist tax for popular areas across Scotland. If this comes to pass, the Visitor Levy Scotland Bill would allow local authorities to charge tourists for overnight stays in hotels, B&Bs and holiday lets. The new tax has been proposed to help control visitor numbers to places like the Scottish Highlands, while raising money for important projects. Similar measures have been implemented in cities like Manchester and Venice in northern Italy. How would the proposed tourist tax cost visitors? The Scottish Government's proposed tourist tax, which would allow councils in Scotland to generate funds from overnight accommodation, would be based on a percentage cost, with this rate being set by local lawmakers. This rate would not include the commission paid to online booking services or room add-ons such as food and drink. Showcasing an example of how this levy would work, the Scottish Government states that a 1% levy on a £200 room would result in a £2 tax. When could the tourist tax be introduced to Scotland? If passed, the Scottish Government has suggested that the levy would be implemented by around 2026, depending on the timescales. Edinburgh City Council and Highlands Council could be among the first to introduce the tax, with both being supportive of the move. These areas are also some of Scotland's most popular destinations, with thousands descending to these places each year. Over 4 million people visit the country's capital every year, with this said to inject around £1.2 billion into the local economy. By Andrew Smart.
From the National, Tuesday the 28th of May, from the comment sections. Wee Ginger Doug, it's shocking, but Douglas Ross is actually right. Column by Wee Ginger Doug. It seems Keir Starmer is a socialist now, and I'm the Dalai Lama. Just a few short weeks ago, Starmer was praising Margaret Thatcher and telling us that he didn't mind being called a conservative. Starmer said Thatcher had brought meaningful change to the UK and applauded her for setting loose our natural entrepreneurialism. It was only just before the general election was called that he gave a fulsome welcome into the Labour Party to hard-right Tory MP Natalie Elphick and said that she represented the values of his Labour Party. But Starmer still wants us to believe he's a socialist. He's a socialist in the exact same way that a bald, late middle-aged man with 4 kids to 2 different women, 3 failed marriages, a repeat prescription for Viagra, and a subscription to Thai mail order bride's website is a virgin. It may once have been true a very long time ago when he still had hair, but it hasn't been the case for decades. If Starmer is a socialist, the word has lost all meaning. Socialists do not believe in kissing up to big business and refusing to consider raising taxes on the wealthiest. Socialists do not believe in stopping the boats or knighthoods and the continuing existence of an unelected House of Lords. Socialists do not claim that their party is a party of business. Socialists most certainly do not believe in expanding private sector involvement in the NHS or refusing to abolish the abhorrent two-child cap on benefits. Keir Starmer is not a socialist. He's a political opportunist who will glibly make contradictory claims to different audiences in the hope of getting himself into power. Socialists have political principles. Starmer has none. Are the Scottish Tories right for once? Calling on voters to use the general election to deliver a fatal blow to the SNP, Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross said, "The election in Scotland is different and why it really matters. Because we've allowed a nationalist minority to hold our country for far too long." Well, quite, Douglas. That nationalist minority would be the hard-right Anglo-British nationalists of the Conservative Party, who have imposed their extremist policies in Scotland despite not having won an election in Scotland since the 1950s. The Tories have given us Brexit, austerity, food banks, and made homeless people begging on the streets of our towns and cities a common sight. If that is not holding our country back, I really don't know what is. Ross added, in this election, the opportunity is there to finally end their independence demands for good. For more than a decade, ever since that once-in-a-generation referendum, the SNP have focused only on independence at the expense of everything else. If Ross thinks that the SNP doing poorly in this upcoming election will end independence demands for good, he's in for a very big disappointment. Demands for independence are not driven by the SNP, they are driven by the repeated and continual failures of the Conservative and Labour parties to implement real and meaningful change in the UK. It is driven by the Unionist failure to do anything to bridge the yawning chasm between the haves and have-nots, and to make the sclerotic and undemocratic Westminster Parliament into a properly representative democratic institution which has the real ability to hold the Prime Minister to account. The demand for Scottish independence is not going away. And that column was by Wee Ginger Doug.
The National, Thursday the 30th of May, from the news section. Glencoe, bodies found in search for father and son in Scottish Highlands. 2 bodies have been found during a search in Glencoe after a father and his 12-year-old son went missing. Police say formal identification is yet to take place, but the family of father and son Tom Parry, 49, and his son Richie have been made aware. We told on Wednesday evening how the pair had been reported missing in the area. The force has said inquiries remain ongoing, but there are no apparent suspicious circumstances, and a report will be submitted to the Procurator Fiscal. Inspector Craig Johnston said, "Our thoughts are with all those involved. I would like to thank all emergency services and mountain rescue volunteers." That was an article by Adam Robertson. The National, Thursday the 30th of May, from the news section. Mary Black has heard no detail on SNP's independence strategy. Mary Black, who is standing down as an MP at this election, said she had not been privy to any discussions about the strategy that was voted through overwhelmingly at the party's conference in October. The strategy decided upon involves the SNP winning a majority of seats, then using the result as a basis to begin negotiations with the UK government on independence. But there has been a confusion over whether the strategy remains in place for the upcoming general election, given that John Swinney gave no indication as to whether any preparations had begun for negotiations when asked by the National at the party's campaign launch. When Black was asked on the National's Holyrood Weekly podcast whether the SNP were committed to the strategy and whether any discussions about it had taken place in the Westminster group, she said, "So me personally, no, I've not heard any particular detail on that." When Swinney was asked about progress on the independence strategy, he pointed to the Building a New Scotland independence papers as evidence of the Scottish Government's work furthering the case. But it emerged earlier this week that work has been paused because of the general election. While government work considered essential and parliamentary business will continue as usual, major set-piece events like the programme for government will need to be delayed until after polling day. Swinney also advised to pause the publication of the Building a New Scotland series. Black went on to stress that Scotland will not achieve independence until a majority want it, but she added that SNP MPs are not returned to Westminster, then the issue will be off the table for some time. She told the podcast, "The reality is Scotland isn't going to be independent until a majority wants it, when a majority demonstrates that in a very clear fashion. If you support independence, there is one thing that is guaranteed at this election, which is that if the SNP are not sent back in large numbers, independence is going to be off the table for quite some time." You can even hear it in the rhetoric that's being used for the past 5 or 10 years from both Labour and Conservative, and even Lib Dem. They have absolutely no interest in even touching the topic of independence, and anyone in Scotland will be able to tell you, as messy as it might seem, the question is not settled. We still have half of the country that wants to have the full powers of an independent country, and that's not going to become a reality unless there are MPs arguing for it. That might seem slow, and it might seem like you're banging your head against a brick wall, but it is the reality of where Scotland is. We voted to give that power back so that we have to make sure that whenever we achieve our independence, it's got to be with a majority expressing that vote, and it's got to be legitimate in the eyes of the international community. A poll by Survation for True North suggested Scottish Labour could win up to 28 seats at the election, while the SNP could plummet to just 16 compared to the 48 won 5 years ago. Support for independence, meanwhile, replicated that of the 2014 referendum, with 45% of decided voters backing it and 55% in favour of staying in the UK. Black added, the SNP have a fight on their hands to maintain relevance at the election. With the nature of Westminster elections and the first past the post system is quite a cutthroat way of doing things, so even if you don't get the vast majority of votes, there's no way for you to be heard, said Black. So I think that the fight is on the SNP's hands to try and maintain that relevance and say to folk, look, if you're wanting Scotland on the agenda at Westminster, here's the party that's best placed to do it. The SNP have been approached for comment. Exclusive article by Steph Braun. The National, Thursday the 30th of May from the news section. STV to air televised debates with 4 Scottish party leaders. STV is set to broadcast a televised debate between 4 Scottish party leaders, it has been announced. The broadcaster said that SNP leader John Swinney, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross and Scottish Lib Dem leader Alex Cole-Hamilton will all feature in a 90-minute debate broadcast by the channel on Monday the 3rd of June from 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. STV's political editor Colin Mackay is set to oversee proceedings from the broadcaster's Pacific Key headquarters in Glasgow, grilling each leader in turn before allowing them to cross-examine one another. It comes after John Swinney said it was ridiculous that the SNP were being excluded from ITV's head-to-head debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, which will be broadcast the following day on June the 4th. STV's head of news and current affairs, Linda Grimes Douglas, said, ahead of major votes like the forthcoming general election, we know many viewers value having the opportunity to hear political leaders set out their plans for the country and debate the issues that matter most to the electorate. STV is pleased to be broadcasting the first leaders' debate of the election campaign, an in-depth and robust head-to-head. It will likely set the agenda for the coming weeks in Scotland. That was an article by Ross Hunter.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, Tune Review, and to tell your friends about our service.